Hello and welcome back to the caves, everybody. Welcome back to Deep Rock Galactic, where today we're going to be going over the classes of the dwarves, but we're going to kind of be going over the pros and cons to them, and why you may want to pick one class over the other. This was a suggestion that I had on a live stream, and it sounded like a really fun video idea, so this will be more oriented towards people that either don't play these classes and may want to try them out, or it's going to be towards somebody who hasn't actually played Deep Rock or hasn't played it very much. So I've played all the classes a lot, where I have about a few hundred hours on each of them. So let's talk about Gunner first, because this is the starting class that you get in the tutorial. And Gunner has quite a few things going for him, where he has a ton of bullets. Gunner gets the most bullets out of anybody. So if you just want to be throwing bullets at enemies, Gunner might be your best option there. All of your primary weapons have a ton of ammo. You can stack even more ammo on each of them. There's not only ammo upgrades, but there's also ammo overclocks, so you can stack even more on there. All of their primary weapons do a ton of damage. They do a ton of damage per second. They're very good for the crowd control, and they're very good for the single target damage. Gunner also has a shield generator, which is arguably one of the most useful tools in the game. This can absolutely save teams. This can completely reset the map. This can shift the flow of the battle in your favor really easily. So you can toss this down. Everybody can stand inside of it. Bugs cannot come inside of it. There are a few enemies that can actually get inside of the shield, but not very many. There's like the rollers and the robots. Those are going to be the main two. Everything else is going to try to stay away from the shield and get out of the shield, which makes it really easy to res teammates. If you toss this down on somebody, it also makes it really easy to either push or hold objectives, because if you throw this down, then enemies have to be forced away from it. So you could throw it directly on an objective, like let's say you're trying to defend the black box or something. You can do that. Or you can toss it out in front of you, which will potentially push enemies outside of that, so they have to come around the other way, which makes it so you kind of have some convenient lines of fire there, just thanks to the shield as well. It can also be useful for pushing big enemies away, like bulk detonators, because they will try to go after a teammate. They always try to target a dwarf, and the shield makes it so that they get pushed away. And finally, Gunner can just be super satisfying to mow down bugs. Even if you get an entire swarm, there's a good chance a good Gunner is going to be able to kill all of them by themselves, and still have plenty of ammo left over, so you probably won't need a resupply right away. For the major dislikes for Gunner as to why you may not want to play them, the big one is going to be mobility. Gunner is the slowest class out of all of the classes. This is mostly because of your tool. You have the zipline launcher, which is incredibly useful for a team setting because it can mitigate fall damage. It can also just be really useful for certain objectives, and it is actually pretty fast mobility so long as you can shoot it downhill. Anytime that you're going uphill, though, is when it's not as good. Gunner has a real hard time if you get a lot of verticality in a mission, to where you just can't get up to certain areas very quickly. It's going to take you some time. You're probably going to have to shoot a zipline up there, take it all the way up, mine part of the wall out, clear it out. If it's even higher up, you're going to have to do that again, and you may have to do that up to like 3 times. Getting back down from there is going to be pretty easy as Gunner, but the trip up can take you much longer than it otherwise would. Gunner just is not very fast on that, which if you already know ahead of time, let's say you're going on a deep dive, and you know that none of the maps have that much verticality to them, and it's generally going to be just hold the objective type missions, Gunner doesn't have a problem with that then, because your mobility doesn't matter. You just have to get to the objective and hold them, and Gunner is arguably the best at holding them. Another dislike that you might have of Gunner is their primary weapons, mostly because they all slow you down when shooting them, meaning that you can't be as fast as you can with the other classes whenever you're trying to get around an attack. There are some exceptions to this, like different overclocks might make them a little bit faster, or same goes with some of the other classes. Some overclocks make it so their weapons are a little bit clunkier, but all of Gunner's primaries are a little bit clunky, so if you get overwhelmed easily, it might be more difficult for you to get used to Gunner. Now, there are a couple ways around this and a couple ways to mitigate it. One would be using your shield. So if you do start getting swarmed, throw your shield at your feet, and that'll give you plenty of breathing room to start shooting. You can also run the perk dash. That's really strong with Gunner because you can stack this with the shield. So if you do get into that situation where you are panicking, more enemies are coming over the top of you, you can potentially just run away with dash, get to a better position, and then start fighting, or run away, get to a better position, start fighting, and if you get overwhelmed again, then throw your shield down. By the time that your shield's running out and after you've used your dash, assuming that you're running full shield duration, you will likely have dash up again so you can run away once more. This is a really strong combination for Gunner, and it makes it so you do kind of mitigate that weakness of them. As well as Gunner is the tankiest of the classes too, because you can stack certain things on your weapons, like the autocannon gets damage reduction, the same with the coil gun gets damage reduction. Now that we've talked about the lowest mobility class, let's talk about the highest mobility class with Scout. So the reasons why you might like Scout is, one, the incredible mobility. The grappling hook is probably the most satisfying tool in the entire game. I really, really like it. It is very nice for getting anywhere. You can get to very high places very quickly. It makes it so it doesn't really matter how vertical the cave is, you're likely still going to be extremely useful and can still get around this. You can get to materials high up on the walls that other classes just can't get to very easily. And it makes it so during hordes, you can actually move around the horde pretty easily just by going around the outside of it, since most of the time you can outpace them just by running around. This also makes it so Scout is pretty good in a team setting for rezzing other teammates, because you can get to them faster than pretty much anybody else can. You can't res them as safely as Gunner can, but so long as you're well ahead of the horde, it doesn't really matter. You should be able to get an easy save there. Scout also has a ton of single target damage. We're taking out high priority targets like dreadnoughts, oppressors, praetorians, menaces, whatever it might be. Scout can actually kill them very fast. This is largely due to their amount of mobility. You can easily get to the weak spots of enemies very quickly and stay at a safe distance when attacking those enemies, as well as pretty much all of your primary and secondary weapons do really well in the one-on-one department. Scout also has the flare gun, which is huge for some people. I don't mind it so much being in kind of a darker cave. Everybody has flares, so you can use that. This is also going to heavily depend on other outside factors, like how bright your display actually is, where you're actually playing the game, because if you have like glares coming in on it and you're trying to play it in like the middle of the day, it might actually be super difficult to see in the dark, as well as if you just don't have the greatest eyesight, or if you have some sort of color blindness. I think that could cause issues, although there are settings in the Deep Rock options to change those around, so it is more accessible that way. But even so, having something like the flare gun is going to be super useful for just lighting up the cave. It also makes it really easy for spotting potential threats ahead of time, because you're likely going to be shooting the flares into the walls and the ceilings up high. Makes it so you're probably going to see leeches a little bit sooner than somebody else would, as well as it just allows you to see potential objectives a little bit easier than you otherwise would. So the flare gun is super useful both for solo and for a team setting. The major cons to Scout, one of them is going to be fall damage. Scout just takes the most amount of fall damage out of anybody, which according to Ghost Ship statistics, kills the most amount of dwarfs, which is not too surprising. Even as a very veteran Scout, it is really easy to accidentally fall to your death. Scout does have passive fall damage reduction, which is nice thanks to their suit upgrade. But even so, it can be really easy to accidentally down yourself, especially if you're going for some of the objectives on the walls. Sometimes this can be really useful for collecting the secondary objectives quickly, because you can just grapple hook your way up, grab a mushroom or something, and if you're taking fall damage and then immediately getting red sugar, it's not a big deal, or getting a resupply. But if you do make some bad plays, you can become a detriment to yourself, which kind of sucks. It is kind of funny when this happens. This is very common amongst new scouts. It's really common to see the scout have the most downs by the end of the mission, and most of their downs are going to be due to them trying to get up somewhere high and falling to their death. Another dislike of Scout is the lack of crowd control. Scout does not have a great way of crowd controlling enemies similar to the other classes. Pretty much all the other classes have better crowd control than them, especially since we already talked about Gunner. All of their primary weapons can kill hordes way easier than pretty much any of Scout's weapons, with a few exceptions. You do have the Drac, which is pretty good for crowd control. It could be really good for swarmers. And once you start getting overclocks, you do actually have some really good ones for that. Let's move over to Engineer now, and just talking about kills. Some of the main reasons why you might like Engie is Engie tends to get the most amount of kills out of any of the classes. This is largely due to the turrets, because the turrets just spot enemies before anybody else does, and they can pick off things like swarmers incredibly effectively, so that is really nice. Engie is also kind of a general purpose class that can deal with everything pretty well. You've got a good amount of crowd control with your secondary weapons for killing crowds or softening up crowds. You also have your turrets for cleaning up crowds, and your primary weapons can also be decent for that, as well as all of these can be built to do high single target damage, so you can kill bigger enemies pretty fast as well. The platform gun is another really big pro of Engineer, as it allows you to get up to higher places or stop fall damage. It can allow other classes like Scout to get up to high areas much safer, and it can just be super useful for building structures. You can build a bunker out of this, although that's not usually necessary. With the repellent platforms, you can make it so bugs are funneled in a particular direction, which can be really nice, as well as you are really good at holding an area. Setting your turrets up ahead of time, as well as pretty much all of your grenades, are really good for some sort of crowd control or some sort of distraction at the very least. It can make it so holding areas is fairly easy for Engineer. Another thing is that Inji feels like he has a bunch of minions, whether that be because of your turrets, whether you're running one or two of them. Most Injis run the SSGs, at least on the higher difficulties. Sometimes you see things like lures too, which can be really fun. It's fun to take a Steve on Inji, and it just feels like you have a whole group with you regardless of whether you're playing solo or whether you're playing a multiplayer, which can be really, really good. Inji also has the best secondaries in the game. I think everybody kind of acknowledges that. Inji's secondaries are equivalent to most of the other classes' primaries, where you've got the grenade launcher, which does really good AoE damage and can be converted into either like a nuke launcher or a railgun, which is fun. You've got the breach cutter, which does really high single target damage and just cleaves right through crowds. Very satisfying weapon. And then you got the shard diffractor, which is basically Gunner's minigun, but as a secondary weapon, and it also lights things on fire, so that's pretty cool. Minigun can light things on fire too, but this one always has fire on it, regardless of how you build it. Major reasons why you may dislike playing Engineer. One is the lack of ammo. Inji goes through ammo probably the fastest of the classes. It's either him or Scout. So you're probably going to have to get resupplies fairly often in order to make them useful. Inji also somewhat lacks mobility, not as much as Gunner, because you can build your platforms up very quickly and you can just parkour with them, which is really good, but this is kind of a difficult skill to get used to. Once you are used to it, it does make it easier, but you can still potentially screw it up and fall to your death this way, or you can potentially screw it up and just take longer than you otherwise would with some of the other classes like Driller or Scout. Another thing that can be kind of a struggle with Engineer is either remembering to place your turrets or placing your turrets in not such a great spot. This can also go for your platform gun if you meant to build things up ahead of time, or if you are just kind of panicking, it can be a little bit rough. Building your turrets ahead of time can be super useful, and it can save you a lot of ammo, as well as it just marks out enemies easier because your turrets are more likely to see them than pretty much anybody else, which is great so long as you actually remember to set them up, which, I mean, even sometimes I don't remember to set up my turrets, so there can be some issues there. And then we've got Driller, which Driller is probably the most different of the classes overall, or at least the most unique of the classes overall, where the major things to like about Driller are that you have a ton of ammo. Pretty much all of Driller's primary weapons get a lot of ammo, and they're very good for crowd control. They all do some sort of status effect. Driller is just the king of status effects. He's got either fire, ice, or sludge on there. He is also pretty much the most melee-oriented class, which melee in this game is quite strong. Everybody does have melee thanks to their pickaxe, but Driller not only gets his pickaxe, but he also gets throwing axes that count as melee, and he gets his drills that count as melee. His drills are another really big pro of liking Driller because they can be used in all sorts of ways. They can be used as a weapon fairly effectively. They actually have the most armor breaking on them out of any weapon in the game, so that's good for stripping the armor off of enemies. They can be used in kind of strange ways where you can use them to block shots from things like the spitballers, or you can use them to block shots from something like the scale bramble that's on the ceiling. Not everybody is aware of that. Driller can actually block a lot of stuff with their drills, which is nice, as well as your drills are just super convenient for getting to the end of a mission. As a new player, it can be really frustrating to try to go back through a cave and get mixed up, get lost, and have the drop pod leave. As Driller, you usually don't need to worry about that so long as you have a decent amount of drill fuel. You can just see where the drop pod is actually landing and just drill right through the walls to actually get to it. And that can be the most useful thing for the team as well, because that makes it really convenient for anybody that's following you to just get directly to the end. The major dislikes to Driller, though, would probably be the fact that all of their weapons are a little bit strange, with the exception of, like, the Sabata, with it being kind of a basic pistol. Everything else is a little bit weird, and you gotta get used to it with Driller because he doesn't really play like any of the other classes. So he's gonna feel the most different of the classes overall. That's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just gonna be a personal preference thing. Common complaint I also hear is the Driller secondaries are difficult to use / not the most engaging things to use, which I can kind of understand. The pistol is pretty basic. The EPC can be really good, but it can be very finicky and very difficult to use if you are trying to use it for actually like digging, if you're using it as a mining EPC build. The wave cooker's fairly straightforward, but it can overheat, and that can be a little bit annoying too, as well as it's generally going to be best with the flamethrower or the cryo cannon just to trigger the status effect to deal damage, Once you get that down, it's not super difficult. And the other thing is the lack of range with Driller. Driller doesn't have a great way of killing enemies at a distance very quickly. All of the secondaries can do this. The Sabata and the microwave gun are going to be the easiest to do this, or at least the easiest to hit with. All of their primary weapons are going to be kind of difficult and awkward to hit enemies at a distance with, without certain overclocks or without particular builds. Like if you go full reach flamethrower, it's actually not going to be that difficult, or if you go AG sludge mix. In conclusion, I would say all of the classes in Deep Rock are really well balanced, and they all have their own pros and cons. Some people really like to play one class a lot. Some people like to play all the classes quite a bit. There's no problem with picking a main class though. Pick whichever one you would like, whichever one speaks the most to you. They're all really good in their own way. And tell me what you guys like about each of the classes and which class you tend to main or which class you play the most often. I'd really like to hear about that. Thank you for the suggestion of this video. If you haven't tried out the classes, I would recommend trying them all out. Thank you guys again for watching this. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.